smarter strategies than Trump's tariff, alternative theories of change. So today we're going to talk about it, about what are the strategies that Trump should have taken in order for him to have these changes that he wanted around, changing how things are done. So we're going to look at different theories of change just to map up his logic that seems to have been lacking here, and the low competencies that I'm worried about with regard to how things are running in America at the moment. So we're going to look at those theories and see what are the alternative. So the first one is industrial strategy first, then tariffs later. Like I said yesterday in the last posting, that they didn't look at what resources were available and what are the items that are going to impact Americans more. And so this strategy of industrial strategy first would have actually given them a right path of how they can go about doing this. So you build before you defend. So you could ask yourself, what is Trump defending with this 145% tariff on tech and iPhones that aren't built in America?
And one of the problems for the US dollar is that American manufacturing depends more on inputs from China than the other way around. So the collapse of trade between them won't just hurt China, but will lead to a severe economic shock in the United States as well.
Invest in US manufacturing clusters and skills and all the engineering, all the resources that are required to ensure that they are competent and increase the productivity. Once the ecosystem is strong, then they can apply the modest tariffs to protect what they've already built. This approach nurtures the industries without inflating prices or collapsing the trade between the two countries. The second one is the strategic reshoring incentives. So incentives supply chains to come to America. Strategically, Donald Trump could have used the tax breaks, subsidies, and free trade zone to pull industries like semiconductors and energy tech back to USA soil. Then by doing so, he would have avoided conflict while also rebuilding that capacity that's needed in America. So the third one is the multilateral pressure and the global trade standards, which seems to be really lacking in this current, even with Joe Biden, that seems to be a really pullback around that. So what I mean by that is that, don't go alone. You're stronger together. You know that phrase, we're stronger together? This one is even true. Even in international relationship, it's really true. When you build alliance, and yes, you can actually become really successful, even in small businesses. Build alliance, even in global trade, internationally, and the country, member state, building alliance is quite important. So this will pressure China to collective trade standards. And it could be around on labor rights, carbon emissions, and IP protections. So, using tariffs only to reinforce the rules. When the tariffs are used to reinforce the rules are much better. They're not viewed as a form of extortion. So they won't be viewed as, Trump starting a tariff war. So these one would have been effective. These strategies would have been effective. Identifying, critical dependencies, like rare earths, pharma, chips, and actually gradually reducing reliance on hostile suppliers. This applies in everything, even in business. If you're depending on one business to supply certain, to refer certain clients to you, and you look at that person, you think that business as their view and the culture may different than your view and culture, you gradually build up capacity by creating new partnership, new referral networks. So, and you identify what is critical in your business. So Trump should have just identified what is critical for America and in terms of dependency, and then start gradually to reduce reliances on these hostile suppliers. This wouldn't be viewed as isolation. It's resilience, done smart and slow. This is why I think I worry about the competency. I think this US government has a low competency people, and it's a worry because then it's affecting all of us who are trader, who've got stocks, who've got super, and it's a worry for everyone. So I didn't think that Americans were voting for Trump, elected Trump, so I can be affected. Now I'm starting to see how, holy crap, how come I'm the one who's affected more and I didn't even go to the vote for him, you see? So that's why I feel like, I don't need this. We don't need this type of leadership. So it is a really important and a really things that they should have actually looked into, and planning and implementing this theory of change. But like I said, they have very low competency government. Don't know what you say about it, a low competency. I mean, they mess up something they talk about all this time, but they couldn't even come up with a how-to approach. The how-to conceptualization of this tariff into just a small little thing that you can use without even planning, just cutting off the world trade, cutting it off without even engaging, without even doing. It's okay to do that in America and to arrest people, to check their phone, what they've been tweeting, and do all the stuff that aren't really democratic, that don't respect the rights of people in America and the freedom of speech. But you can't do that in the rest of the world. You need to follow the rule of law. And this is a problem, big problem for Trump. So the fourth thing that I think they could have done is the strategic decoupling, which is phased and targeted. Okay, so they could have identified those dependency on like rare earth, pharma chip, and gradually reduce reliance on hostile supplier. So this would not be viewed as isolation, but it would be viewed as really strategic and also done really smarter and slower. Of course, the way they've gone about this was with the tariff, actually, the Trump as tariff. I like a sledgehammer, the sledgehammer that, they carry around, that Elon Musk was carrying around. The sledgehammer don't work. These are scalpels. If the US wants lasting economic strength, it needs strategy, not spectacle. Coming on and having it, hash slammer everywhere, it's not going to work. So, yeah, let's hope they will actually reevaluate how they went about doing this tariff. because the bond market and everyone is nervous. There's a huge sellout of the US dollar. People don't want to carry US dollar now.
Commodity prices all rose over the weekend, with gold and silver up the most, 1.3 and 3.7% respectively, because of the flight of capital out of the US dollar. The trade-weighted index of the dollar fell below 100 for the second time in 2 years. It's depreciated nearly 10% this year, which is kind of what Donald Trump and his economics team wanted, except they didn't want it to be because global capital was running away. Australian dollar was steady today at 63 US cents, but down against most of the other currencies.
They don't trust America. If you don't trust the country, it's just 14th of April. This man hasn't finished 100 days since he was elected. He's already done more damage in the view of the world. When you look at any other organization, say mainstream media, when they talk about this subject, just go up the comments underneath. People aren't really happy with America. That just look at even BBC, you go to Canada, you look at comments that people are commenting, they're just not feeling it. They're not really feeling this America. That's a big problem. And also this now is reflected in the financial market now, in terms of whether people want to have the US dollar at the bonds market. And Japan could not find a buyer because they hold the bond, the second holder of the US bond. So they couldn't find a buyer. No one wanted to buy anything US bond, to carry US bond. So that's a big problem. So if they're gonna fly that into the market, there'll be more bonds, there'll be more seller of the US bond than there are available buyers. For that, the yields will go up. What meaning of the yields? The interest rates. The interest that the US government pays on that $1 trillion, $36 trillion plus on their debt, the government debt.
Well, Steve, we got a huge fiscal problem when you start talking about bond markets and what do we worry about bond markets, and you're starting to worry about possibly interest rates going up. That makes things worse. And just one note here, we are now spending more paying off interest on our debt. The federal government is on the credit card, the $36 trillion credit card, than we are paying on the defense of this country. So interest on the debt now is a bigger line item than actually our military.
And here you have it right here, Joe. Interest 881, defense 855, and everything less. There is an interesting thing called Ferguson's Law. It was developed by a Scottish political theorist in the 17th century, that when a country's debt service exceeds its defense, it's got problems. And there are examples like 17th century Spain and even Britain in the 1930s, which was still under a mountain of debt from World War I, trying to deal with Hitler. And so this is not a good place to be. But let's also look at what could have been. Here's what could have been. If back in 2001, we hadn't done some things, we literally could have paid off our debt. And what were those things? Huge tax cuts, originally starting under George W. Bush and then under Trump 1.0. We increased discretionary spending far more than inflation and economic growth would have suggested, although I will concede some of this was for defense. And then we had recession responses, initially to the financial crisis and then to COVID. Sure, we would have done some of this, but you could imagine that all of this could have been down here somewhere anyway, at a very prudent and manageable debt level. And instead, we're sitting up here and going over there.
And it could bankrupt the US government. So there are a lot of theories around this amounts. Yeah, but it's getting to the level where if they're not gonna put a leash on this president, things are gonna escalate from here. All of this stuff that he's doing, he's actually doing without any authority. It's not his power. Actually, the parliament should be doing this. The Congress should be doing this.
Last time I checked, we are not standing up a factory in 2 weeks' time. That's a really critical issue. It takes, say, 3, 4, 5 years to open up a new factory. And that factory then will be there for decades. And so the question that CEOs face is not what will tariff rates be today, but what will they be in 2028, in 2038, in 2048, 2058. And that's the thing. This is a White House where it will raise tariffs on Wednesday and then lower them again on Thursday. So while he may have changed the tariffs that we all are going to have to pay at the grocery store, he hasn't changed the ones that matter for bringing manufacturing back to America, which is expectations of the future. The implication of this, of course, is that we're going to get all the costs of the tariffs, but because of the chaotic nature of this White House, we're going to get none of the benefits.
Benefits, yeah. There are no benefits at all in this, Kim.
You know, where are they? I thought America was a democratic society where there's a balance and check of the power of the president. They seem to be quiet. See? That on itself, it's a problem. Okay, when you look at it, you're thinking, okay, that doesn't look democratic. If you allow a president to do this and undermine the the Constitution, the rule of law, deporting people without any fair chance of, answering to why they were there illegal anyway. Just all this stuff about it. And even people now, I was talking to one of my friends who is a researcher. I was thinking about canceling the trip to go to America because they don't want to be arrested. They don't want to be getting to the airport and have somebody looking at their phone and checking who they've been tweeting. Which posts they've been liking, which posts they didn't like, and then their visa is rejected. The worst part is that they get, detained. This harrowing story of people being detained, arbitrary detention of actually people in academic, researcher, university, professor, and so on, just arbitrarily being arrested for no reason at all. And that is actually a country of dictatorship. It's moving from being a democratic society with rule of law and to being a dictator. No difference than any other dictator, countries you think that are bad. They don't respect people's human rights. That looks like they're not doing that in America right now. You can't just, detain people without any reason and insist on looking at their phone, who they're being talking to. What kind of privacy invasion is that? For what? For what? Under this emergency something that Alien Acts that Trump cooked up to be able for him to do the stuff that he's doing? I mean, even journalists are not allowed to even attend. There's another companies that are allowed to attend Trump's conference because they don't want to. They still refer to the Mexico as a Gulf of Mexico, not Gulf of America. What? I mean, all of that stuff, they don't actually. When you listen to it, you're kind of thinking, okay, this is not different than any other country that is a dictator. So that hasn't got any rule of law. It's not different at this point. There's nothing. And now they're starting to interfere with financial markets. I mean, this is not good, America. It's not good. You don't see it. We can see it from here. I can see it from here in Australia. This is bad. This is really bad. I mean, in the last few days since these tariffs were put in place, I think a lot of people, China has had a lot of friends. China has had so many friends. People are more likely leaning towards China than they are leaning to America at this point. So what is the strategy here? It's how they went about doing this stuff, the tariff. If all this stuff they're doing, it was only affecting them alone, they wouldn't have bothered because they know that each country has its own sovereignty to protect. But if you start interfering with other countries, Nah. No. See? That's where the problem is. When it start affecting people who didn't even vote for this, then it becomes a big problem for the world. So these tariffs are imposed by Donald Trump to the rest of the world, including friends like Australia, Singapore, all of them got this base 10% tariff. And they're still sitting there. They're still saying that they're going to continue with the tariff after 90 days. They're still going to continue with the tariff and all the stuff after 90 days. But where's the strategy? Are they going to continue? And see, this uncertainty is a problem in business. In politics, it may not be a problem, but in business, it's a problem. And in confidence, a problem. Consumer confidence and business confidence, huge problem. You think people would want to buy those US bonds? No, they wouldn't want to buy it because right now their market sentiment is like, okay, we're still expecting this thing to drop a bit further, to go down, because we know the tariffs are there waiting. It's sitting there like a grenade, with a pin open. People know it's coming. The investor, they know it's coming. And right now, everyone is realigning themselves with seeing how they can respond to this. How can they prepare for this? And so that any crazy policy that Trump's announced on Truth Social, it won't matter anymore. Like I said, 145% doesn't matter. Tariff 145% to China doesn't matter when the trade ended at 39%. Okay, that ridiculous 39% of trade. The trade ended, once you put a tariff above 20%, you're already towards on the cusp of ending the trade within that country. Finish. So it doesn't matter to put it even to 400 because it ended less than at 50 or lower percentage. That's when the trade ended. So it's low competence is a big problem.
And finally, the Financial Times had a nice graph over the weekend. 80% of Americans think the country would be better off if more Americans worked in manufacturing, but rather fewer of them thought that they would be better off if they worked in manufacturing. And that's finance.
But anyway, thank you guys for listening. So subscribe for real world geoeconomic breakdown that go beyond the headlines. Comment below, which strategy would you choose if you were in that Trump administration? See you next time. Bye.